You know, one of the hardest truths you'll ever have to accept is this us. Most people don't actually care about your problems, us. And that's not bitterness talking. That's clarity. That's awareness. See, we live in a time where sharing has become currency. Everybody's posting, tweeting, venting, putting their wounds on display like trophies. But behind all that sharing, there's a dangerous assumption that people are listening with care, with compassion, with intent to help. They're not. Some people, sure, select few, may care, and even fewer may act. But most, they're scrolling. They're nodding without listening. Or worse, they're collecting what you say, not for comfort, but for leverage. You've got to understand human nature. People are hardwired to prioritize their own survival, their own security, their own path. That's not cruelty, that's instinct. And when you start pouring out your soul to just anyone, you forget that. You forget that empathy is not universal, and neither is discretion. Some will smile while you're talking, but in the back of their minds, they're filing away your weakness, waiting for the day they can use it to justify your failure, to dim your light, or to feel better about their own struggle. There's a psychological phenomenon called Schadenfreude. It's a German word that means taking pleasure in someone else's pain. It sounds ugly, but it's real. People do it not because they're evil, but because they're insecure. Your struggle becomes their relief. Your tears make them feel just a little drier. And when you keep handing them your heartbreak, you're giving away your dignity to someone who's not equipped to hold it. You see, when you're vulnerable with the wrong people, you risk turning your pain into entertainment. And you were not made to be anyone's emotional sideshow. You were not put on this earth to beg for sympathy from spectators. What you carry, the weight, the scars, the setbacks, that's sacred ground. It deserves protection, not exposure. It deserves healing, not applause. Let me tell you something. Pain is not a public event. Healing is not a group project. And endurance doesn't need a witness. Sometimes the greatest victories are silent. Sometimes the real growth happens behind closed doors with the curtains drawn and your phone turned off. That's where the real transformation begins. Don't mistake being heard for being helped. Sometimes you just need to be quiet and move. Not because you're hiding, but because you're protecting. Because you're building. Because you know that when the time is right, your results will speak louder than your complaints ever could. You have to stop throwing your soul out like breadcrumbs, hoping someone will follow and rescue you. They won't. They can't. And even if they tried, they wouldn't know where to take you. Only you know where you need to go. Only you can walk the path. And the less you explain yourself, the more power you keep. Now, I'm not saying you should carry everything alone. I'm saying choose wisely who you let into your inner circle. Not everyone who listens is loyal. Not everyone who nods is noble. Some are just waiting for the fall. But if you keep your peace, keep your vision, and keep your head down while the world expects you to break, you'll rise stronger and quieter than they ever imagined. Remember this. The people you think you need to tell your problems to are often the least qualified to handle them. Learn to suffer in silence so you can rise in power, access. Let me say something that might shake the room a little. Excuse your vulnerability is not a right other people are entitled to. It's a privilege they must earn. Docs, that's worth repeating because we've been taught to get this backwards. We live in a culture that pushes radical transparency, that tells you if you're not sharing everything, everywhere, with everyone, then you're being fake or guarded or not authentic. But that's a lie, a dangerous one. Being authentic doesn't mean being exposed. And being real doesn't mean being reckless with your soul. See, vulnerability is powerful, not because it's emotional, but because it's sacred. When you open up about your fears, your failures, your doubts, what you're doing is placing your most fragile self in someone else's hands. That's not weak. That's deep trust. And that kind of trust is not something to hand out like samples at a grocery store. It should be reserved for people who have proven they know what to do with it. You don't put a crown in the hands of someone who doesn't understand royalty. And you don't pour out your heart to someone who hasn't shown they can carry it with care. That's not cold. That's wisdom. There's a psychological principle known as extos emotional boundaries. These are the invisible lines that separate what's yours to carry emotionally and what others are allowed to touch. People with weak emotional boundaries tend to overshare, often hoping that openness will create closeness. But it doesn't. What it does is leave you vulnerable to people who haven't earned the right to see that part of you. That's how you end up wounded by people who never really loved you. They just listened well enough to get inside. And let me tell you, some folks don't want access so they can help. They want it so they can manipulate. They want the blueprint to your breakdown, to build you back up, but to know exactly where to strike if you ever threaten their comfort. So what do? You discern, you observe. You ask yourself, has this person demonstrated integrity? Do they have a track record of honoring others' pain? Can they hold my truth without dropping it? If the answer is no, then don't share. Not because you're afraid, not because you're proud, but because you're ex-quest wise. It's not pride to protect your peace. It's maturity. And some of the most emotionally intelligent people are those who've learned how to speak without spilling, how to process without performing, how to heal without announcing every stage of it. And hear me on this. You are not obligated to explain your silence to people who haven't respected your voice. Just because someone asks doesn't mean you owe them an answer. Curiosity is not consent. Proximity is not permission. People may want access to your truth, but wanting it doesn't mean they can handle it. So stop bleeding in places that can't bandage you. Stop casting your pearls before people who only see stones. Your vulnerability, when placed in the wrong hands, becomes a weapon that can be turned against you. But in the right hands, the rare hands, it becomes healing, connection, and restoration. Asa, protect your soul like it's treasure, because it is. And treasure isn't kept out in the open. It's guarded, not because it's weak, but because it's priceless. Sucks. Let me talk to the ones who are in the middle of it, the ones who are grinding in silence, fighting battles no one claps for, pushing through nights where the only witness to your strength is God and the walls around you. Hear me, SX, strength is built in silent socks. You don't need a spotlight to become powerful. You don't need a platform to grow. Some of the most dangerous people walking this earth are the ones who built themselves in the dark, not to be seen, but to be solid. They didn't need validation. They needed transformation. See, we live in a time where everything is broadcasted, progress, pain, opinions, even prayer. But growth doesn't always announce itself. Real development happens where cameras can't go and applause can't reach. It happens in the hidden places, the silent hours, the early mornings, the late nights, the moments where you want to give up but don't. That's where character is carved. That's where resolve is refined. There's a psychological concept called sex delayed gratification knock. It's the ability to resist the temptation of an immediate reward in order to receive something greater later. That's what silence does. It denies the impulse to be recognized now so you can be respected the centers later. When you stay quiet and do the work, when you go through pain without posting it, when you rise each day and keep building, you are training your mind to be disciplined, not dependent on attention. Because here's the truth: attention fades. Sympathy dries up. But the strength you gain in secret stays with you. It becomes part of your core. It becomes unshakable because it wasn't borrowed. It was built. And let's be honest, people love the finished product, but they don't care much about the process. They don't want to see your sacrifice. They want to celebrate your success once it's polished, once it's impressive. That's why silence is sacred, because it's in silence that you learn to stop performing and start evolving. You stop doing it for them and you start doing it for you. Even Jesus had to go to the wilderness before the world ever heard his voice. Even diamonds are formed in pressure, in darkness, not in open fields. Everything powerful starts in isolation. And if you're in that season, don't rush to be seen. Don't force your process into the public eye just because it feels lonely. Trust me. If you break the shell too early, you'll come out unformed. If you unveil your progress too soon, you'll invite opinions that will shake your confidence before your roots are deep enough to stand. But if you hold steady, if you let the silence stretch you, humble you, discipline you, when you finally speak, your voice will carry weight. Not noise, but weight. And isn't that what you want? Not just to be heard, but to be felt. To speak and shift atmospheres. To walk into rooms and change the temperature. Not because you shouted, but because you became. So no, you don't need to tell everyone what you're going through. You don't need to announce your grind, your pain, or your plans. You just need to keep showing up when no one's watching. Keep praying when no one's listening. Keep preparing when no one's clapping. Because the harvest that grows in silence is the one that lasts through the storm. As exiles, become so rooted in your silence that when you finally rise, there's no part of you left that depends on being seen. That's not weakness. That's unshakable strength. Let's get to the truth that nobody really wants to say out loud. The sex talking doesn't fix it. Doing does. And don't get me wrong. I believe in the power of a good conversation. I believe in therapy. I believe in trusted counsel. But somewhere along the way, we started substituting Dex talking about the thing for Dex stops doing something about it. We confuse expression with execution. We've created a culture where people will spend hours explaining their pain, their frustration, their trauma, but walk away with no plan, no strategy, no action. Just more words, more noise, more echo chambers of shared misery. And I want to tell you, that's not healing. That's not breakthrough. That's not growth. That's stagnation disguised as vulnerability. See, talking gives you the illusion of progress. It releases the pressure, it gets the emotions out, and for a moment, you feel lighter. But if you're not careful, you'll keep coming back to the conversation like it's a therapy treadmill, running hard, but going nowhere. You'll keep repeating the same story, the same problems to anyone who will listen, hoping it'll change by itself. It won't. You can't talk your way out of what you behaved your way into. You've got to take action. Because healing is not passive. Change is not accidental. And deliverance doesn't happen because you described the problem well. It happens because you decided you were done living in it. There's a psychological trap called SXS, rumination. It's when your thoughts start spinning in circles. You keep replaying what happened, how it felt, what they did, what you should have said. And it becomes addictive because it gives you the sensation of control without requiring the discomfort of change. But let me be clear. Acts or replaying the problem is not the same as resolving it. You've got to stop sitting in the ashes and start rebuilding the fire. Yes, acknowledge what happened. Yes, process your pain. But then act, move, adjust, change your environment, change your habits, get in motion. Because forward doesn't happen in theory. It happens in decisions, in discipline, in sacrifice. You'll never walk into your next season if your mouth is always talking about the last one. And some of us are delaying our own deliverance because we've become experts in articulation and amateurs in application. You can't keep diagnosing the wound and never dressing it. You can't keep announcing the storm and never building the ark. When you act, even in small ways, something shifts inside of you. Action builds confidence. Action builds momentum. And action tells your mind and your spirit, we're not staying here. We're not stuck. We're moving forward, no matter how slowly. You want peace. Then take steps that create it. You want clarity. Then remove the clutter. Not just from your room, but from your routines, your relationships, your thoughts. You want change. Then stop narrating your pain and start disciplining your path. You don't have to talk less because your pain isn't real. You talk less because your energy is now being invested in building something better. You're focused. You're intentional. And when people ask, what's going on? You don't need to explain. They'll see it in your posture. They'll see it in your decisions. They'll see it in the results. X, because when you stop talking about it and start doing something about it, your life becomes the loudest answer you could ever give. Let me speak to the moment when life hits hardest. When you're in the middle of the fire, when things fall apart, when your plans collapse, and your heart is heavy. In those moments, the temptation is to talk, to explain, to defend, to cry out to whoever will listen. And while that might feel natural, even necessary, let me challenge you with this truth, the SXS, when you're in the fire, protect your image, not because you're pretending, but because you're preserving patsex C. People don't always respond to your pain with compassion. Some respond with calculation. And when you're raw, you're readable. When you're broken, you're vulnerable to being branded. So you've got to learn how to endure quietly, how to bleed without broadcasting, how to rebuild without begging for sympathy. That's not deception. That's wisdom. You're not being fake when you withhold your struggle. You're being strategic. There's a difference between healing and exposing. And when you're in the thick of it, emotionally, financially, spiritually, you're still in formation. You're still processing. And what you present to the world in that state may become the version they choose to believe about you forever, even long after you've grown past it. Human psychology is prone to X first impressions. That's what you reveal during your lowest season might become your identity in the minds of those who saw it. They won't always update perception just because you've evolved. They'll remember the weakness, not the wisdom that came after. That's why your silence isn't just a shield. It's a strategy. Because while you're in recovery mode, the last thing you need is to fight both your circumstance and public opinion at the same time. It's not about being proud. It's about being precise. It's about knowing that some people are not emotionally intelligent enough to witness your process without distorting it. They'll take a temporary struggle and turn it into your permanent story. And once they've labeled you, they'll speak about you in rooms you're not in, using a version of you that no longer exists. And hear me, it's not just enemies you need to be cautious with. Sometimes it's well-meaning people who speak too soon. They love you, but they don't understand you. They'll offer advice that doesn't fit your context. They'll try to fix what they can't even comprehend. And before you know it, their noise drowns out your own intuition. Now you're doubting what God whispered to you because of what someone else shouted at you. So guard your process. Guard your image. Let people see the fruit, not the fertilizer. Let them witness the tree, not the soil it came from. Because while you're in the middle of the fire, your energy must be reserved for transformation, not explanation. And when the time is right, when you've healed, when the dust has settled, when your mind is clear and your direction secure, then you can speak from a place of power. Then you can tell your story, not for pity, but for purpose. Then your testimony becomes a tool, not a trigger. Because the goal isn't to prove anything while you're struggling. The goal is to emerge so complete, so whole, so grounded that your very presence becomes the proof of your survival. When you're in the fire, say less and build more, because your silence today protects the stage you'll stand on tomorrow, Bot X. Now let's talk about something we don't often like to admit. The fact that not everyone who listens to your problems wants you to win. Some people are not there to help you heal. They're there to study your weakness. They gather your pain like data, not because they care, but because they want to calculate. They sit quietly, not to console you, but to take notes they'll use when your back is turned. The secrets you cannot share. Sensitive struggles with people who have not demonstrated safe intentions. Ox S, this isn't bitterness, it's discernment. And if you don't learn it, you will leak your most vulnerable self into the hands of people who are secretly rooting for your downfall. They smile at your story, but smirk at your setbacks. They pretend to support you, but internally, they're threatened by your potential. So when you fall, it comforts their insecurity. Let's go deeper. The human ego is fragile. And when you're surrounded by people who haven't dealt with their own insecurities, your transparency becomes a threat. When you speak about your vision, your plans, your pain, even your hope, it shines a light on what they're avoiding. And instead of cheering you on, they start quietly competing. That's how jealousy is born in silence and betrayal is birthed in friendship. Some people are only close enough to gather information. And when the moment is right, when you rise, when you start shining, when your healing starts looking like wholeness, they'll use your past to try and poison your present. That's why the old saying is still true to us. Everyone with you is not for you. You have to be wise enough to know the difference between a confidant and a consultant. A confidant carries your burden with you. A consultant only listens so they can one day advise you from a distance, or worse, critique you in public based on what you trusted them with in private. We often think spiritual warfare looks like demons and darkness, but sometimes it looks like friendly faces with hidden agendas. And when you're vulnerable, when you're hurting, when you're tired, that's when you're most likely to trust the wrong voice. That's when you'll be tempted to over-explain, to seek validation, to ask for sympathy from people who see you as a project, not a person. But here's what maturity teaches you. Iska, you don't owe everyone access to your healing journey. Some things need to stay sacred. Some chapters need to be walked through with God alone, with silence as your armor and prayer as your guide. Not because you're isolating, but because you're insulating. You're guarding your growth. You're protecting your power. You see, betrayal never starts with strangers. It starts with access. And access is something you control. It's a boundary, not a barrier. It's not about being secretive. It's about being selective. Everyone doesn't get to hear your pain because everyone will know what to do with it. Some will weaponize it. Some will gossip about it. And some will resent you for surviving what they're still stuck in. So be wise. Be quiet. Move in silence. Let your healing speak for itself. Let your growth announce you. And when the time is right, not too soon, not too loud, your story will serve its purpose, not as a plea for validation, but as a proclamation of victory. Don't hand your wounds to people who profit from your weakness. Protect your peace like your destiny depends on it, because it does. Ox box.